What would you do if the man you married turned out to be the one your mother let go years ago? Stay with me to the very end to find out how this unexpected journey unfolds. And if you love stories filled with family, redemption, and second chances, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss what's coming next. They say you'll remember your wedding day forever. I remember the wallpaper, cream-colored, with a faint golden pattern that curled like ivy up the endless walls of the Hawthorne estate. I remember tracing it with my eyes while they fitted me into a dress that didn't belong to me, while someone pinned my hair back tighter than I could bear. I remember the silence, not the kind that feels sacred or sweet, the kind that hums beneath your skin like a warning, like something is about to break, and somehow you already know it'll be you. I didn't hear music. I didn't hear applause. I didn't hear the priest pronounce us husband and wife. I heard nothing but my own breath catching in my throat when I looked up and saw Alexander Hawthorne standing across from me, his expression carved in stone. He didn't smile. He didn't touch me. Not even when the priest cleared his throat, waiting for the kiss that never came. Instead, Alexander reached for my hand, steady, cold, practiced. He slid the ring onto my finger as if he'd done it 100 times before, for 100 other women who meant nothing to him. I was no one special. Not to him. Not here. But to my mother. I was everything. And she needed saving. So I let the ceremony go on. I let them call me his wife. Because a lifetime ago, before the debts, before the sickness, I had promised her I'd do anything to keep our family standing. And I had meant it. I slipped away the moment the guests disappeared into the ballroom. For the reception I hadn't planned. No one followed me. I found the bridal suite on the second floor, tucked away like some afterthought. It smelled of fresh polish and too much money. Leather, wood, something faintly metallic in the air like cold steel. I closed the door behind me and leaned my forehead against it, breathing in like I could somehow collect myself if I just stood, still long enough. But the stillness only made it worse. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the massive bed, my hands shaking in my lap. Someone had placed a silver tray on the nightstand. Champagne, a single white rose, a handwritten card that simply read, "Congratulations. A lie wrapped in ribbon." My suitcase sat in the corner, half zipped, still carrying the only parts of me that felt real. I knelt down and dug through the layers of soft fabric, searching for the handkerchief my mother had given me that morning. It was her way of sending me into battle, like it would somehow protect me when my heart already felt like it was tearing at the seams. I found it folded neatly beneath an old poetry book I'd brought along to remind myself who I used to be. But something else slipped out when I lifted the book, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, yellowed by time. I knew that handwriting. My mother's. I stared at it for a long moment before I dared to open it. "My dearest H, you once asked me why I never stayed. Why I never wrote. I told myself you'd forget me in time, but I never did. I carry you in the quiet moments, in the small hours, in every breath I've taken since. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to fight for us. But duty was louder than my heart, and I was never strong enough to choose you. If this letter ever finds you, I hope you'll remember me not with bitterness, but with the love I never stopped feeling. Eleanor." I pressed the letter to my chest, blinking back the sting in my eyes. H. I didn't need to guess who that was. New York. The city she never spoke of. The life she never shared. Had I just married the man my mother once loved? Or was that too cruel a twist to believe? The door creaked softly behind me. I scrambled to tuck the letter back into my suitcase, my heart pounding. When I looked up, Alexander stood there, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his tie loose at his neck like the night had already worn him down. He didn't speak. He didn't move. For a breathless moment, I wondered if he could hear my heart breaking in the silence between us. But then he nodded. Once, curt, and turned to leave without a word. The door clicked shut behind him like a final sentence I hadn't earned the right to finish. I sat there, staring at the empty space he left behind. I wasn't sure if I hated him or pitied him. And then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I reached for the letter again. I read it once more, slower this time. The words felt different now. Heavier. I had always thought this marriage was about debts, about saving the family business, about a deal made behind closed doors. But as I traced the trembling loops of my mother's handwriting, I started to wonder if I had just stepped into a story that had started long before I was ever born, and, if so, what would I be willing to risk to finish it? I had always imagined New York as something bright, skyscrapers glowing against midnight skies, the hum of life pouring through crowded streets, endless windows lit up like stars. But the Hawthorne estate wasn't part of that city. It sat on the edge of it, miles away from the noise, tucked behind iron gates and stone walls. A fortress dressed in wealth and silence. And inside it felt even colder than the night outside. I spent the first week wandering from room to room like a ghost in my own life. Nobody stopped me. Nobody welcomed me. It didn't take long to realize. The staff had been ordered to treat me like furniture, something to dust off and leave alone. I would pass them in the hallways and watch them lower their eyes, bow slightly, and disappear before I could say a single word. The only voice I heard belonged to Alexander. Short clipped sentences about scheduling. Occasional questions about my meals, as if I were a guest, not a wife. And even those exchanges felt rehearsed, polite, empty. He never stayed long enough to ask me how I was holding up. He never lingered to see if I wanted to answer. By the fourth night, I started to forget the sound of my own voice. I sat by the window in the sitting room, staring out over the city lights that looked so far away, like something meant for someone else's life. I thought of Vermont, of my mother. I had called her every night, though she tried to sound stronger than she was. Each conversation shorter than the last. Each goodbye heavier than the one before. She would tell me stories to fill, the quiet, little things, how the kettle still whistled too loud in the mornings, how she'd hum old songs while folding linens at the shop, even though no customers had walked through the door in weeks. I could hear the tremble in her voice when she asked if I was happy. I lied, because I didn't know how to explain that. I was surviving in a house that didn't want me. It was on the fifth night that I heard him on the phone. I hadn't meant to listen. I had wandered down to the library, a room so large it felt like stepping into someone else's memory. The door had been left slightly open. His voice carried low and rough through the crack in the door. Yes. Pay the full amount. No, she doesn't. Need to know. Make sure the hospice team stays on schedule. Whatever they need, just make it happen. I held my breath. Hospice. My mother. I pressed my hand to my mouth, afraid to make a sound. Afraid if I breathed too loud, I'd break the moment and never understand what I'd just heard. Alexander was paying for her care, not just covering hospital bills, not just writing checks to make himself look generous. He had arranged everything, quietly, secretly, and I had no idea. I stepped back from the door and nearly knocked over a vase sitting on the hallway table. The sharp clink of glass startled me, but I caught it just in time. I turned on my heel and hurried back to the suite before I could let the weight of it all crush me. Why would he do that? Not out of love. He didn't know me. He didn't even seem to like me. It didn't make sense. Unless... I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase in the corner like it might give me the answers I didn't have the courage to ask for. I thought about the letter again. The one my mother had written to H to him. Did he still carry feelings for her? Was I just a replacement for something he'd lost years ago? And worse. Was I the price he was paying for his own regret? I swallowed hard and stood, pacing the floor like it might somehow settle the storm inside me. That night, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea. It was the only thing I knew how to do to feel close to home. I sat on the balcony, wrapping my sweater tighter around my shoulders as the cool air kissed my skin. I cupped the mug in both hands, breathing in the steam, letting it fill the parts of me that felt like they were unraveling. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift to the kitchen back home, to my mother standing by the window, humming softly as she stirred honey into my tea, to the way she used to sit across from me at the table, her eyes soft, full of quiet hope. "You'll understand one day, Charlotte," she used to say. "Love is not what you think it is when you're young. It's quieter, heavier. It's the choices you make when no one's watching." I pressed the mug to my lips, tasting the familiar warmth. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I let the tears fall, slow and silent. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, a small envelope lay on the floor. No name. No handwriting. Inside was a card with 5 words written in neat block letters. Dinner, 7 o'clock, dining room. No signature. But I knew it was him. I turned the card over in my hand, wondering why, after days of silence, he had decided to invite me to his table, and more importantly, what he would finally be brave enough to say. I had imagined dinner at the Hawthorne estate would be stiff, formal, served by people who never made eye contact. I wasn't wrong. When I entered the dining room at exactly 7 o'clock, I found the table already set, white porcelain, polished silver, a single candle flickering in the middle like someone had remembered to add warmth, but hadn't quite known how. Alexander was already seated at the far end. The table between us felt like a canyon, a stretch of silence I wasn't sure either of us knew how to cross. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply nodded toward the chair waiting for me, like this was any other business dinner on his schedule. I sat down quietly, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet pressed in so tight, I thought I might choke on it. And then, finally, his voice broke through. "Your mother's condition." "I've been updated." I flinched. He didn't ask if I wanted to talk about her. He simply stated it, like it was just another line on a report. But there was something in the way his eyes flickered for half a second, like he was searching for the right words and coming up short. "How long have you been helping her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Since the day I found out about the debt," he replied. I swallowed, clutching the edge of the table. "Why?" His jaw tensed, his knuckles tightening around the glass in front of him. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I expected, almost like it hurt to say it aloud. "Because I owed her," he said simply. My breath caught. I didn't move. Didn't blink. I let the words settle, sink into the cracks I'd been too afraid to touch. I reached for the one thing that had haunted me since the night I found the letter. "You knew her," I whispered. His eyes, locked onto mine, sharp and unflinching. Yes, the candle between us flickered, casting shadows across the walls like ghosts rising from the past. "How long?" I asked, my voice cracking. He looked down at his hands, almost as if he was trying to remember how to explain the weight of years he'd never spoken of. "I met Eleanor in Vermont when I was 20, he began quietly. "I was working with a small architecture firm back then. Nothing like what I have now. Your family's shop made wedding dresses for one of our clients. She was kind to me. More than she should have been." He paused, swallowing hard, as if the memory still stung. "I asked her to leave with me. I had nothing to offer her but a future I couldn't promise. She said no. She said her family needed her more than I ever could. I felt the ground shift beneath me, as if every step I'd taken since the wedding had been leading to this moment. And you married me. Because of her? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. No, he said firmly. I married you because I knew you deserved better than the life you were about to lose. Your father's debts were choking your family. I could stop it. I wanted to stop it, but you didn't tell me, I whispered. His jaw clenched again. I didn't want to chain you to something that felt like a debt being repaid, he said softly. I didn't want you to hate me for saving you the wrong way. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears burning behind my eyes. All this time, I had believed I was just a pawn in a business transaction, but there had been something else, something older, something deeper. That night, I packed a small bag. I needed to see her. When I arrived in Vermont the next afternoon, the sky hung heavy, with the kind of gray that makes everything feel slower, quieter. My mother was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket tucked around her shoulders, the sunlight catching in her hair like it used to when I was little. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes told me she knew why I had come. I sat on the floor at her feet, resting my head on her knee like I had when I was a child. And for the first time in years, I asked the question I had carried in my heart for too long. Was it him, Mama? I whispered. Was it Alexander? She didn't flinch. She didn't lie. Her fingers moved gently through my hair, soft and slow. Yes. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. She sighed, her hand trembling slightly as she cupped my cheek. Because I knew you'd carry my mistakes like they were yours, she whispered. And I couldn't bear to see you lose yourself trying to fix what I couldn't. I sat up, looking into her eyes that had seen more loss and more love than I could begin to understand. Did you love him? I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded, tears spilling over her cheeks. And now, you do too, she whispered. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say I didn't know him, that I couldn't possibly feel anything but confusion and anger. But my heart had already betrayed me. I stayed with her that night, holding her hand until she fell asleep. And in the stillness, I knew. This story had begun long before I was born. But maybe, just maybe, I was meant to finish it. I used to believe people's hearts could close like doors. I used to believe mine had. But as I stood on the porch of my mother's house the next morning, staring down at the suitcase by my feet, I knew I had been wrong. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold everything together: the shop, my mother, my father's mistakes, my own fears. But the truth was, I had never held anything. I had only been holding my breath. And now, it was time to face him. I returned to the city by late afternoon. I didn't call ahead. I didn't send word. I needed to know what he would say when he wasn't expecting me. The car pulled up to the estate, and for the first time since I had married him, I didn't feel like a stranger on the wrong side of the gate. I felt like someone who deserved answers. The butler opened the door before I reached for the handle, his expression unreadable. "He's in the garden," he murmured, as if he had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. I had never stepped into the garden before. It was hidden behind the house, walled in by hedges taller than I could see over. A world apart from the cold marble halls and polished wood floors. And there he was. Alexander stood with his back to me, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands buried in the soil as he knelt beside a patch of freshly planted mint. I watched him for a moment, unsure if I was ready to break the quiet between us, But when I saw his shoulders rise and fall, not with the steady control I had grown used to, but with something heavier, something that looked a lot like exhaustion, I knew I couldn't stand in the shadows any longer. "You remembered," I said softly. He froze. His hands stilled in the dirt, and slowly he turned to face me. His eyes, those same eyes that had once looked through me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience, now held something I wasn't ready to name. "Your mother used to grow it," he replied quietly. "In Vermont. I thought maybe it would help you feel less alone here." I took a step closer, then another, until I was standing only a few feet away from him. "You could have told me," I whispered. He stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands, but he didn't reach for me. "He didn't dare. I didn't know how," he said. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I found her letter," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I know about you and my mother. I know everything." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I was going to leave her behind," he said softly. "Once, years ago, I told myself I could move on, build something without her." He took a step closer, his voice cracking for the first time since I had met him. "But I never did." I felt my heart twist in my chest. "Did you marry me to replace her?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He flinched like I had struck him. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I married you because I couldn't bear to watch you lose everything the way I lost her. And somewhere along the way, I started wanting you for who you are, not who she was." I shook my head, fighting back tears. "But you never let me in. You kept me at arm's length. You made me feel like I was nothing more than a contract." He closed the distance between us, slowly, carefully, like he wasn't sure I'd let him come any closer. And then, for the first time since we had said our vows, he dropped to his knees. I gasped, the world tilting beneath me as I watched. A man I thought was made of steel collapse in front of me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry, Charlotte. I didn't know how to love you the right way. I didn't think you'd ever want me if you knew the truth." I fell to my knees in front of him, my hands trembling as I reached for his face. His breath hitched. When I touched him, softly, slowly, like I was learning him for the first time. "I wanted you," I whispered. "Not the money. Not the mansion. You." His eyes closed, a tear slipping down his cheek before he could stop it. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his. And for the first time, he let himself fall apart in my arms. We stayed like that until the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden bathed in soft gold. And when he finally pulled back, his voice was steady again, but softer this time. "Stay," he whispered. "Not because you have to, because you want to." I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his, grounding us both in something real. "I'm tired of running," I whispered. And I meant it. I was tired of carrying the weight of everyone else's mistakes, tired of hiding behind duty and fear. It was time to stop holding my breath, time to choose something for myself. And this time, I chose him. That night, we didn't speak much. We didn't need to. We sat together in the kitchen, hands wrapped around warm mugs of peppermint tea, the scent filling the room like a memory reborn. No velvet gowns, no polished silver, no business deals or silent stares, just two people learning how to start again. And in that quiet, I knew. We had already begun. It should have felt like a beginning. But the truth is, I woke the next morning with a restlessness I couldn't shake. Alexander had fallen asleep on the armchair by the window, his head tilted back, his chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of someone finally unburdened. I watched him for a long while, memorizing the way the first soft light of dawn touched his face. I could have stayed. I could have leaned into the peace of that moment, convinced myself we'd turned some invisible corner, that the worst was over. But something deep inside me whispered otherwise. I packed a small bag before he woke, careful not to make a sound. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. We both knew there were still pieces of this story left unresolved. I stood at the doorway, one last time, my heart tight in my chest as I looked back at him, and then I left. The drive to Vermont felt shorter this time, or maybe I had grown used to measuring distance by something other than miles. I arrived just as the sun was beginning to warm the porch of my mother's house. She was already awake, sitting by the window with a worn quilt draped over her knees, a small smile tugging at her lips when she saw me walk through the door. "I was wondering when you'd come home," she whispered. I sank to the floor beside her chair again, resting my head on her lap like I had before. "I needed space to think," I murmured. She ran her fingers through my hair the way she used to when I was little. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked softly. I swallowed, unsure of how to answer. "I found the truth," I whispered, "but I don't know if I'm brave enough to live with it." We sat in silence for a long while, the steady tick of the old clock filling the room. And then, as if she had waited all night to say it, she spoke. "Sometimes love doesn't feel like freedom, Charlotte," she said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like standing still in a storm, holding your ground when everything inside you wants to run." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle deep in the places I'd tried so hard to ignore. Later that evening, I took a walk to clear my mind. The small cafe at the edge of town had always been my refuge, the place I used to go when I needed to remember who I was before life got too heavy. The owner, a kind woman named Beth, waved to me as I entered, pointing to my favorite corner table without needing to ask. I ordered tea, settling into the worn leather booth, staring out the window as the street lamps flickered to life. And that's when I saw him, Alexander. Standing outside on the sidewalk, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his face half shadowed by the glow of the streetlight. He didn't move. He didn't come inside. He just stood there, watching me through the glass like he had no right to cross the distance between us. I don't know how long I sat there, staring back at him. But eventually, I stood. I stepped outside, wrapping my coat tighter around me as the cold bit at my skin. We stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with everything neither of us knew how to say. "I didn't think you'd follow me here," I whispered. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't look away. "I told you I wouldn't let you go until you wanted me to," he said softly. I felt the weight of his words settle over me like snow. "I don't know if I can give you what you want," I admitted. "I don't even know who I am anymore." He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching me. "Then let me wait with you while you figure it out," he whispered. My breath caught. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that this wasn't just another promise waiting to be broken. But the truth was, I didn't know how. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. But then he called my name, soft, like a plea. I froze. When I turned back, he was holding something in his hands, a small leather-bound notebook. He stepped forward, offering it to me like it was something fragile. I took it, my fingers trembling as I opened the cover. Inside, page after page, my name, dates, memories. The first time he saw me in the dress, shop in Vermont. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. The night I stood under the chandelier, too afraid to look him in the eye. Every page was filled with observations. Small things. Things I hadn't even noticed about myself. I felt my throat tighten as I turned the last page. At the bottom, written in careful script, "I've been falling in love with you quietly, Charlotte. long before you ever knew. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. I looked up, finding him still standing there, not demanding, not forcing, just waiting. I didn't run to him. I didn't throw my arms around his neck. Instead, I did the one thing I hadn't been brave enough to do until now. I nodded. One small, simple nod. The kind that says I see you. And maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to be seen too. He didn't move, as if he was afraid to break the fragile thread holding us together. But when I took the first step toward him, his breath hitched, and in that moment, I knew. He wasn't here to win. He was here to stay, and maybe so was I. We didn't speak on the walk back to my mother's house. The night air pressed around us, heavy and cool, filling the space between our footsteps. It wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. It was softer somehow, like the space you leave between words when you aren't ready to let them go. I unlocked the door and stepped inside first, holding it open longer than I needed to. Alexander crossed the threshold slowly, as if stepping into this little house required something greater than permission. He stood just inside the doorway, looking smaller somehow. Less like the man I had married and more like the boy my mother once knew. I didn't know what to do next. So I did the only thing that felt honest. I motioned toward the kitchen. Would you like some tea? His shoulders dropped ever so slightly. A breath he didn't seem to realize he was holding slipped past his lips. I'd love that, he whispered. The kettle whistled softly as I moved around the small kitchen. I found 2 chipped mugs in the cabinet, the same ones my mother and I had used for years. Alexander stood near the window, watching me like I might disappear if he blinked too long, Really did grow mint here, I murmured, breaking the quiet. He nodded. I planted it the day after the wedding, he replied, his voice low. I thought, maybe if you stayed long enough, you'd find it. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, letting the steam rise between us like a bridge we didn't quite know how to cross. I handed him a mug and leaned against the counter, gripping mine like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I need to tell you something, he said after a long moment. I braced myself, unsure if I could bear another confession. He took a slow sip before setting the mug down on the counter, his eyes never leaving mine. Your father's debt. It wasn't the only thing I erased, he began quietly. I swallowed hard, the warmth in my hand suddenly feeling too much to hold. He took a step closer. There was another deal, he continued. Before I married you, a land contract that would have destroyed your family's shop. Developers wanted it for luxury condos. I walked away from that deal. Cost me millions. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking deeper than I expected. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. His jaw tightened. Because I didn't want you to think I was buying your life piece by piece. I wanted you to have a choice. My chest ached with the quiet truth between us. The kind that doesn't shout, but hums low in the bones. I never asked you to fix everything, I said softly. I know, he replied, his voice nearly breaking, but I didn't know how to stop trying. The floor creaked softly behind us. We both turned to find my mother standing in the hallway, wrapped in her robe, her face pale but steady. She leaned against the doorframe, her hand trembling slightly, on the wood. I heard voices, she whispered. Alexander stiffened, as if unsure whether to stay or retreat, but I reached for his hand before he could move. It's okay, I murmured. We crossed the room together, standing just a breath away from her. She looked up at him, really looked at him, for the first time since all of this had begun. And then, to my surprise, she smiled, soft, tired, but real. Come sit, she whispered. We sat together in the small living room, the three of us surrounded by old quilts and worn furniture. Alexander held his mug with both hands, staring down at the steam like it held all the things he couldn't say aloud. My mother reached for his hand, that same hand that had once reached for her, years ago. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Alexander's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I tried," he rasped. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "And now," she continued, glancing toward me, "it's time you let her keep hers." I felt my heart catch in my chest. "What promise?" I asked softly. She smiled through her tears. "To live your life," she whispered, "not mine." I leaned into Alexander's side, resting my head against his shoulder. We sat there until the sun began to rise, the quiet between us finally feeling less like a weight and more like a place to rest. Later that morning, we took her outside to the garden. The mint had started to wither in the fall chill, but she smiled anyway, brushing her fingers over the leaves like they held all the years she thought she had lost. Alexander knelt beside her, pressing his hand to the earth. "I'll plant more in the spring," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes closing for a moment, as if she could already smell the promise of it. That night, after we had tucked her back into bed, Alexander turned to me in the hallway. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for mine. "I don't know if I deserve you," he whispered. I pressed my palm to his cheek, feeling the warmth of him beneath my fingertips. "Maybe not," I replied, softly. "But I think I want to try anyway." He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes as if those words were the only thing holding him together. And when he opened them again, there was no distance left between us. No walls, no contracts, no quiet meant to keep us apart. Just two people, learning to love without anything left to lose. Spring arrived slower than I expected. The snow melted in patches that left the ground muddy and raw, like the earth wasn't sure it was ready to bloom again. I knew the feeling. We stayed in Vermont longer than either of us had planned, long enough for my mother to settle into quieter days, long enough for the silence between Alexander and me to soften into something that felt less like distance and more like breathing. Every morning I'd find him on the porch before the sun had fully risen, cradling a mug of coffee in his hands, staring out at the garden like it held all the answers he'd spent a lifetime chasing. He didn't speak much in those moments, neither did I. Some mornings I'd sit beside him in the old wicker chair, our knees brushing under the quilts we shared, and we'd watch the world wake up together. Slow, uncertain, but somehow steady. It was on one of those mornings, just as the frost gave way to soft green shoots, that I found him standing in the middle of the yard, holding a small tray of mint seedlings. I watched from the porch, my breath catching in my throat. He knelt down, pressing his hands into the soil without hesitation. Like this time, he wasn't planting them for her. He was planting them for us. I slipped on my boots and walked down the steps, crossing the damp grass until I stood beside him. He looked up, his face softening when he saw me. "I thought we could do it together this time," he murmured. I nodded, dropping to my knees beside him without a word. And so, we planted, row by row, leaf by leaf. He showed me how to loosen the roots before pressing them into the earth. I showed him how to pat the soil down gently, not too tight. We worked in rhythm, our hands brushing occasionally, neither of us pulling away. The sun climbed higher, warming the back of my neck. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And in that moment, I knew I had never truly seen him until now. Not as the man I had feared. Not as the ghost of my mother's past, but as someone who had been quietly building a life he didn't think he deserved. With me. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden. He told me stories I'd never heard before, about the years after. He left Vermont, about the empty apartments and long nights in the city, about the first time he saw me standing in the doorway of the dress shop. "I almost didn't recognize you," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You look so much like her. But then, you smiled, and I knew." "Knew what?" I asked softly. "That you weren't her," he replied. "You were you. And somehow, that was enough." That night we cooked dinner together in the tiny kitchen, eggs and toast and tea, nothing fancy. My mother sat at the table, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. I watched the two of them laugh over some memory I had never heard before, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of someone else's unfinished story. I felt like I belonged. Later, after we had cleaned up the dishes and tucked my mother into bed, I stood in the hallway, staring at the worn wallpaper, tracing the faded pattern with my fingers. Alexander came up behind me, his breath warm against the back of my neck. "You look like you're somewhere else," he whispered. I turned to face him, pressing my hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath my palm. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be," I whispered. He leaned his forehead against mine, his hands slipping around my waist. "I don't want to take you back to New York unless you want to go," he murmured. I closed my eyes, letting his words settle. "I don't want to go back to the life we had there," I replied quietly. "But maybe we could build something new, together." He pulled back just enough to meet my gaze, his eyes soft and steady. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. I smiled, threading my fingers through his. "I want to bring her with us," I whispered. "Back to the city, to your home. I want her to see the garden when it grows. I want her to know she never lost us." We moved her 2 weeks later, not because the doctors told us to, not because it was part of some plan, because she asked. She stood on the porch one morning, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and said softly, "I think I'm ready to go home." We both knew she didn't mean Vermont, so we packed her things, her books, her quilts, the old teapot she refused to leave behind, and we brought her back to New York. The Hawthorne estate felt different when we returned. The walls didn't seem so tall. The halls didn't echo quite so loud. We planted a small garden in the courtyard, right outside the kitchen window, mint, lavender, rosemary, and every morning, my mother would sit by that window, watching the leaves stretch toward the sun. Sometimes, she'd hum the old songs I remembered from my childhood. Sometimes she'd sit in silence, holding a warm cup of tea in her hands. But always, she smiled. One evening, while we were unpacking the last of her boxes, I found it. Tucked in the corner, wrapped in an old scarf, a small velvet ring box. I opened it slowly, my breath catching when I saw the simple silver band inside. I turned to my mother, my throat tight. "Why did you keep this?" I whispered. She reached out, taking it gently from my hands. "Because even when I had to let him go, I never stopped believing that one day love would find its way back to us," she whispered. I pressed the box to my chest, closing my eyes. And in that quiet moment, I knew. It already had. It didn't happen with music. There were no guests, no flowers, no cameras, no velvet gowns or glass chandeliers. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day no one marks on a calendar, the kind of day you almost forget, until you realize it's the one that changed you forever. The garden had finally bloomed. The mint had taken root, growing taller than we expected. Lavender filled the corners of the courtyard, swaying softly in the late spring breeze. And my mother sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a teacup, smiling as though she'd waited her whole life to see this moment unfold. Alexander stood across from me, holding both my hands in his. No priest. No contract. No audience. Just him. Just me. And the quiet. He cleared his throat softly, but I could see his hands trembling. The man who once signed billion-dollar deals without flinching, now shaking because of me. I don't have vows written, he whispered. I smiled, tightening my grip on his hands. Good, I whispered back. Neither do I. We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure where to begin. And then, softly, carefully, he spoke. I never believed I could have a life like this, he began, his voice breaking on the edges. I spent so many years building walls, filling rooms with things that made me feel safe, but none of it ever felt like home. He lifted my hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each knuckle, slow and steady. Until you, he whispered. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. He took a deep breath, as if gathering every word from somewhere deeper than I'd ever seen him reach. I promised to tear down every wall I built to keep you out. I promised to hold space for your fears, your hopes, your dreams, no matter how long it takes. I promised to love you, not in the way the world taught me, but in the quiet ways you've shown me. I pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the steady, trembling beat beneath my palm. And I promise, I whispered, my voice catching, to stop running from the life that scares me, if it means standing still with you. His shoulders sagged, relief flooding his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. We didn't exchange rings. We didn't need to. We sealed it with nothing more than the quiet, and the knowing, and the kind of love that didn't need to be spoken loudly to be heard. Later that evening, we sat with my mother in the garden. She sipped her tea slowly, the silver band I had found days ago resting on her frail finger like it had never left. She reached for my hand, her grip weaker than before, but steady enough to make me look up. I waited a long time for you two to find your way here, she whispered, her voice soft as wind through the lavender. I leaned my head on her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of peppermint and honey. And I'm glad you did, I whispered back. She looked over at Alexander, her eyes glistening. Take care of her, she said, her voice shaking just a little. He leaned forward, covering both our hands with his. I already do, he whispered. We stayed in the garden long after the sun slipped below the horizon, the three of us sitting under the quiet glow of the porch light, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by the soft hum of life we had built together. There was no need to speak. Sometimes the most powerful vows aren't the ones you say out loud. Sometimes they're the ones you live quietly, every day, in the small moments. A hand reaching for yours in the dark. A cup of tea made just the way you like it. A garden planted, not for the past, but for the future. Later that night, after we had carried my mother to bed and turned off the porch light, Alexander led me back inside. He didn't rush. He didn't pull. He simply held my hand, steady and sure, as we walked through the quiet house together. When we reached the bedroom, he stopped in the doorway, turning to face me. I don't want to lose this, he whispered. Whatever this is, whatever we're still figuring out, I don't want to lose it. I stepped closer, cupping his face in my hands. Then don't, I whispered back. Stay. Every day. Choose it. Choose us. His breath hitched, his forehead leaning into mine. I will, he whispered. We didn't need to fill the silence with anything more. We knew what it meant now. We undressed slowly, not like strangers, learning each other for the first time, but like two people finally coming home. There was no rush, no urgency, no need to prove anything. just skin against skin, breath against breath. Hands tangled, heart steady. We lay in the quiet afterward, our bodies pressed together under the soft weight of the sheets. And for the first time since the day I'd stood under that cold chandelier, I felt light. Not because the weight was gone, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I turned to him in the dark, brushing my fingers through his hair. "You're mine," I whispered softly. "Forever." His breath shuddered. His arms tightened around me. "And you're mine," he whispered back. "Not because I own you, not because I saved you, but because you saved me." We fell asleep like that, hearts steady, breath slow, the quiet wrapping around us like something sacred. And in that quiet, I knew. We weren't living in someone else's story anymore. We were writing our own. One day, one promise, one quiet vow at a time. If you enjoyed this story and would love to hear more like it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing heartfelt stories straight to you. Thank you for being here with us. Until next time.